It was summer. King Muzili and his army crossed the mountains of the storm god and marched to Aleppo, royal capital of Yamhad, where his grandfather Hattusili received the fatal wound. The fighting men of Aleppo were mighty and great in number, and for many days the Hittites were unable to penetrate their land. On the third week, Muzili regrouped the infantry and mounted an attack on his chariot, surrounded by Theppa and the royal guard. When the troops advanced and the two sides were about to engage, an arrow pierced through Theppa's shoulder, and she slung forward and tumbled off her chariot. "Luka!" cried Hasuman, who was on the same chariot. Hearing the cry, the king became greatly distressed, and the troops fumbled in confusion. The enemy launched a fierce attack, and by noon, the Hittites were chased down the plains and forced into retreat. "This was done by one of our men. Of all my years in battle, I have never been shot from behind," said Theppa with difficulty as Muzili rushed into the tent. Ewanika, who shared a chariot with Zidanta, Hantili's man, all of a sudden turned pale and shook with great terror. "What do you know, Ewanika? Was it you who did this treacherous act, or was it Zidanta, who was with you in the chariot?" asked Theppa. I cannot say, cried Ewanika, falling to the ground. "Luka, you revealed a wicked character, accusing your fellow men of intrigue when it was you who were careless in battle," said Muzili in a thundering voice. "From today you are not my chief of the royal guard. Leave! You are banished to Ankuas." Without delay, Theppa's seal was taken away, and she was dispatched with the king's letter to Ankuas. Muzili destroyed Aleppo. Then he marched down the Euphrates and destroyed Babylon. He fought Hurrians and was victorious. He took possessions and captives of Babylon, and the statues of their gods, Marduk and Sarpanitum. Accounts of Muzili's victories reached Ankuas, and its people flooded the streets with joy, for Ankuas was one of the cities most loyal to the king. But Hakiyasu, governor of the city, has been sighing all day with a look of doom. What is the look? And the sighing? Is the king not victorious? And is he not on his way to Hattusa this very day with great possessions? Asked Theppa, who had been confined to the governor's house. She was heartened by Muzili's success, even though her abrupt dismissal had left her saddened and perplexed. "I fear for the king, for I heard ominous things are lying in wait for him tonight," said Hatkiyasu. "Tell me what you know, friend," said Theppa. "There's rumor that Hantili, the king's cupbearer and brother-in-law, is conspiring to overthrow the king with powerful lords in the assembly. The king's long absence from the royal city has given room for treachery," said Hatkiyasu. "Prepare my horse," said Theppa. "I cannot," said Hatkiyasu, drawing from his desk a clay tablet with a royal seal. "King's letter to Hatkiyasu, governor of Ankuas. Hatkiyasu, I command Luka, my chief of the royal guard, to your custody. See to his recovery. Tend to him as you would to me. Admit no one from Hantili into your house, for he seeks to shed Luka's blood. Again I command you, safeguard Luka. Let nothing happen to him." At the royal palace, the Hittite lords gathered in king's honor for a sumptuous feast and indulged themselves with choice delicacies and the best wine from the king's vineyard, all in boundless supply. There were dances and music of cymbal, flute, harp, and lyre.
My son the king has done what no one but Sargon of Akkad, the legendary man, and King Hattusili, who became god, had done before him, crossing mighty Euphrates and crushing his enemies like a great flood sweeping away their gods and possessions,
said Hantili. Why does the king sit in silence? And why has he not touched any of the food and wine? I see the king is tired from his journey, said Lord Pusu, father of Queen Callie. The journey was no more arduous than any I have taken. No, it did not tire me, but I am weighed down by sorrow, said Muzili.
O king, I have an urgent matter,
said Hantili. I too have to speak to you, said Muzili. The two exited the hall and walked to a hallway called Corridor of the Kings. There Hantili said to the king,
My son the king, a diviner came with a message she read from the entrails of a goat. She said the goddess of the underworld is craving to see the smoke rising from your funeral.
Is it you, Hantili, who plotted against Luca and conspired against me? Said the king. Suddenly blood drained from his face, and he began wincing with pain.
It is only the poison in a cup you drank to the storm god earlier, when you placed the plunders in his temple. I know you would not have touched any of the food and drink, said Hantili.
Why you,
of all, who are like a father to me,
cried Muzili.
Do we prepare a ritual of substitution, or do we satisfy the goddess? Do you not think, O king, that gods must always be satisfied?
Said Hantili, as the king fell to the floor. Muzili! A voice pierced through the air, and there at the end of the corridor stood Theppa, king's chief of the royal guard.
Good. Now we killed 2 bees with 1 arrow,
said Hantili. Guard! Cried Theppa. Instantly the spearmen appeared, but they cornered Theppa instead of Hantili. Traitors! Shouted Theppa, snatching a spear and skewering one of the men, then with her sword slashing her way to the king.
Assassin!
Screamed Hantili. Now guards crowded the corridor, but Theppa, as if suddenly endowed with divine prowess, slung the king onto her back and roared. She so resembled the prancing lion that the soldiers backed away in fear as she charged down the corridor. Theppa raced through the courtyard, down the eastern gate, then in a moment submerged into the underground passageway that she and her friends had once roamed. She sped through the grain silo and the secret chambers, and finally saw the exit. Then she paused, for she saw at the end of the passageway was a soldier with a spear, expecting their escape. It was Ewanika. Ewanika saw her and stared. So did Theppa. For a moment, neither of them moved. Suddenly, tears filled Ewanika's eyes, and he backed away. Theppa cast on him one last glance, then with Muzili on her back, dashed into the dark. With Musili on her back, Theppa raced through the slopes, hills, and open plains, and she did not stop until they were in the safety of the woods. The moon reigned high in the sky, cool, unblemished. Its silvery light dusted through the trees as Theppa gently laid her friend down.
"Luca,"
said Musili. His eyes opened.
"Musili. Luca, Musili."
In the arms of his friend, Musili died, shortly before dawn. Theppa scouted the woods and found a grotto behind a waterfall. There she hid Musili's body. Then she came out of the woods and saw a flock of sheep dotting the green wavy hills, and a shepherd of uncommon stature standing by. The shepherd saw Theppa, and his eyes grew large.
"Luca!"
exclaimed the shepherd, who was her friend Hasuman.
"Friend,"
said Theppa,
"I have returned to my father's house. It is better to tend the sheep than to serve a pack of wolves,"
said Hasuman.
"Hasuman, Musili has died. I am going back to Hattusa now to seek justice for his blood,"
said Theppa.
"My king!"
cried Hasuman, tears flowing down his face.
"I will avenge Musili and give him a proper burial. But if in 2 days I do not return," said Theppa, "the king's body is in the grotto behind the waterfall. Give him burial, Hasuman, and drink to your friend Luca, who will be no more."
The two friends wept. Then with vengeance carved in her heart, Theppa set out for Hattusa. By noon, Theppa was on the main road to Hattusa. When she reached Missoula Shrine, where the path from the west and the main road converged, two travelers in foreigners' clothing crossed onto the main road and walked before her. One of them turned and stared at her. Soon, also the other.
"Theppa?"
called one of them, on whose leather belt was attached a Cretan dagger. It was Pitizio, the servant of the Cretan merchant Telos, who journeyed with her to Hattusa 20 years ago. "Are you Theppa, daughter of my king?" asked the younger man standing beside Pitizio. He was Amillo, Milidu's youngest son, only 10 when Theppa left Crinis.
"Theppa, or Theppa who called herself Luca, we found you. Great goddess be praised!"
exclaimed Pitizio, who learned her true identity through Milidu, who, at the bidding of King Orolos, trod islands far and wide until her whereabouts were known.
"Theppa, you must return to Crinis without delay. Bear yourself and be strong. Your father, King Orolos, has died,"
said Pitizio.
"Father!"
cried Theppa, tears flowing down her face. "There's more. Your cousin, Prince Elimu of Salos, came with a fleet of funerary delegates who were in fact fighting men. By force they took the palace and imprisoned your mother the queen. We know nothing of her fate since our departure a full moon ago, said Amilo. For days, Theppa, Pidizio, and Amilo trod the rocket path southwest until they reached that familiar trail in Lucalands. There they followed the stony path that led them to a harbor, where they took ship, and in 2 days reached bustling Petroas, the Cretan city.
We Cretans might be known for jewelry and pottery, but it is not by luck that we don't fortify our cities. We can fight better than we can trade. Go home to lush Crinis, Orolo's heir, and destroy those evil men who violate the divine law of hospitality,
said Telos, the Cretan merchant, who gave Theppa a ship with long oars and a crew of able fighting men, and sent her on her way with gifts and the best of Cretan swords. After pouring libation to the gods, Theppa set out for Crinis, and with steady winds saw the tip of Crinis' lush mountains 3 days later at dusk. Lying on the deck under the stars, Theppa pondered upon her plan, and she became afraid. How can I succeed, when I have been all these years an outcast of this land? My endeavor is not blessed by the gods, and I will be devoured by my enemy. That night, she had a dream. In the dream, she was in the familiar woods of her youth, chasing the same boar she caught 20 years ago, running through the same pathless terrain. As before, the boar slowed by the creek. She reached for a dagger and saw her hand trembling, for she realized this time that the boar was exceedingly large. Then the boar plodded toward her, and it began melting like a river of wax until it collapsed under her feet, a heap of bones. Old woman, what is it you are doing? Asked the stranger wrapped in a cloak.
Digging wild oka roots to make soup,
said the old woman, kneeling by the river bank that framed the rear wall of the royal palace. That is strange. Are not oka roots made into scraps for the swines?
They are, and we would not have to eat them were those locusts from Salos not here to clean out our bread and oil and our sheep and cows. They are fearless because our king has died, and there is no one left to defend us, said the old woman.
Nurse, said the stranger, taking off her hood.
Theppa,
cried the old woman, tears crowding down her wrinkled face. It is me. I have come to be a staff in your old age, said Theppa.
My child, your father the king died in his sleep 2 full moons ago. Your mother was not so fortunate. The enemy locked her in the cellar, and she was starved to death,
said Nurse, tears again flowing down her face. Nurse, I hear that tomorrow Elimu and the Salosian lords are going hunting in the Valley of Oaks, leaving most of their fighting men here in the field by the palace, where they have since encamped. Prepare an extravagant feast with roast cows and lambs, and as much wine as you can provide. Let them eat and drink their fill. and then you must all go inside the palace and bolt the king's grounds gate, which you must not open until you hear my voice," said Theppa. "Have no fear, for tomorrow by this time, not one of them will need another meal." Early in the morning, Prince Elimu and the Sarlosian lords rode away to the Valley of Oaks after their meal, each on a handsome horse richly adorned. With them also was a small band of soldiers, there to assist the lord's every need. "Where are the boars? I did not endure this trouble to see some trees," said Elimu when they reached the woods. "Elimu," said the voice from behind. He turned and saw 3 men on their horses, all strapped with bow and quiver. 2 were Milidu's sons, the 3rd he failed to recognize. "I am Theppa, Orolo's heir." "Ah, my cousin," said Elimu, who laughed to hide his shock. "Here to take back what you stole," said Theppa. "I take what is lawfully mine, in the absence of an heir," said Elimu. "And to avenge my mother's blood," said Theppa. "Save the prince!" cried Elimu and galloped away. "Ilo, protector of Crinis, give me aid," said Theppa, and galloped after him. The Sarlosians would have done better to stay and face their enemies, who were only 3. But, triggered by Elimu's sudden fright, they dashed after the prince into Crinis' ancient woods, and soon were impeded by its unruly growth, some knocked down by low-hanging boughs, others trapped in the branches, and several overthrown by their horses. Theppa, who knew the forest by heart, flanked Elimu on the left, forcing him to separate from others and flee deeper to the right, where he found to his dismay that the route led to a dead end. "Pick up the sword and defend your honor," said Theppa to Elimu, who got off the horse and collapsed to the ground. "Have pity," said Elimu. "Stand up," said Theppa, getting off the horse and walking to her foe. "Have pity," said again Elimu, who stood up and with trembling hands reached for his arm, which was a gold ornamental sword, too dull and heavy for fighting. He drew the sword and flung it at his enemy, then fell to the ground with Theppa's dagger in his chest. And that the end of the beginning of Crinis' woes. Prince Elimu. Nurse and the servants did as Theppa asked, and prepared a lavish feast for the Sarlosians. 30 sheep, 10 cows, and 5 giant boars in all were slaughtered, roasted with fragrant herbs and flayed into generous portions. Then from the cellar they drew off the best of Crinician wine and mixed them with water. In earnest hospitality they bid the guests to eat and drink, and helped them with whatever they desired. In mid-course, the servants withdrew one by one into the palace, when the Sarlosians were wild with feasting. The nurse bolted the king's bronze gate. Seeing the signal, Milidu and his sons dashed out of the bushes with Crinis' fighting men. So did Theppa and the Cretan warriors hiding in the woods to their right. Caught by surprise in the middle of feasting, many Sarlosians perished before they could find their arms, and more fell under the swords of their confused compatriots. By the end of noon, not one escaped the gruesome fate. Theppa crossed over the field and stopped before the palace. "Nurse, open the gate. It is Theppa. I have come home." A figure stood on the stony peak, overlooking the golden billows and the rolling hills down below. The figure was a slender woman, well advanced in age. Her hair, haphazardly tied over her back, was long and pure white. In the 30 years since her return, Theppa had seen 2 more wars. The first was with Sarlos, whose king retaliated against Crinis after the death of Elimu, his son. Theppa destroyed all the Sarlosian warships but one, sending it back to its king with a sound rebuke. The second, which lasted 8 years, was fueled by the ambitions of the neighboring states. In both wars, Theppa defended her land, and Crinis was made secure. I wonder, as she stood there on the stony peak, did she regret not having avenged Luca and Muzili? That I do not know. But I know what she regretted the most, that she did not close her father's eyes when he died, and that she did not bury Muzili, her dearest friend. Hantili, who killed Muzili, lived to see his son killed by Zidanta, his own instrument of murder. Zidanta, who killed Hantili's son to become king, was killed by his own son. Of vengeance, what do we know? Are the mortal ways higher than that of the divine, who with threads invisible weaves a net loose and wide for those who shed blood, and there leave them prosper in ease, until one day of a sudden all the strings are drawn? With that, we end the tale of the warrior queen, Theppa of Crinis.